Welcome to the Inside Nebraska Recruiting Blitz podcast. I'm Tim Verghese with Inside Nebraska. Bit of a solo show to start. Before you turn this off, I promise we'll have a guest here at the end of the show. It won't just be me the whole time rambling. But just wanted to knock off. It's been a big recruiting weekend for Nebraska, coming off the win against Colorado. And we just wanted to touch on some of the top recruits that were in town. And then at the end of this episode, we'll do a bit of a lightning round with Midwest regional analyst Greg Smith on some of the top Midwest prospects in town. Before we do that, encourage you to like and subscribe this video. Check us out over at InsideNebraska.com for all our written content. We've got recruiting content, we've got football content. We have shows here over at Inside Nebraska YouTube on football, on breaking down the game, bold predictions, rapid recaps after press conferences, and of course recruiting blitz every Tuesday after home games and every Monday after away games. So let's get right into it. We'll start here. Nebraska hosted 2025 four-star wide receiver Cortez Mills over the weekend for an unofficial visit. He's currently committed to Oklahoma, and Nebraska's trying to flip him away. The latest we've heard here coming out of that visit, we saw Mills on campus before the game. He was one of the first recruits in the stadium before the game, hanging out with four-star wide receiver commit Isaiah Mosey. Those two were practically attached at the hip the whole evening. And, Mosey's working hard. Since he flipped over from Oregon, he's been working hard to get Mills to join him in the class. Interesting enough, those two are listed at similar sizes, height and weight wise. Mosey has some size on Mills. I think that was an interesting note for me, having seen both of those guys independently, but seeing them together, just seeing the size comparisons between the two, both give you a little something different. Mosey's more of a guy that's best after the catch, while Mills can kind of line up all over the offense. Outside receiver, inside receiver, can create at all three levels, separate at all three levels, has massive hands, very, very reliable catcher. If you were to comp him to someone in Nebraska's scheme right now, or comp him to someone at Nebraska right now, I think Mosey's more in the form of like a Ja'Cory Barney, while Mills is like a smaller version of what Jamal Banks is, just a guy that can separate at all three levels, is a reliable hands catcher, can create a little bit after the catch, but just a very, very reliable target with some electric upside. So Mills, getting into the visit for him, this was something that came together and at times was a little fluid in terms of him getting into town. Oklahoma tried going into the visit, trying to get him to cancel that visit. When he committed to Oklahoma, he'd let them know, he's like, hey, there are other schools still after me. I do want to entertain that. And they were open to that. But this Nebraska visit was something that Oklahoma really didn't want him to make. And, they fought hard for him to not make it, but ultimately he made it into town. He was wearing Nebraska gear in Memorial Stadium. And again, by all accounts, early on, he seemed to have had a good time. He's bonded well with the coaching staff. He's bonded, he spent time with Matt Rule before the game, spent time with Gary McGuire before the game, spent time with senior assistant Jamar Mosey and obviously Isaiah Mosey. And Nebraska's in good position here. If anyone's going to flip him from Oklahoma, feels like Nebraska's that school that's best position to do so, kind of as we see here in September. Plenty of time till signing day, but Nebraska's in good position there. We'll see if they're able to close. Mills is one of the biggest visits of the weekend, just for the scale of it. It'll be a win over a former rival, but still one that I think this fan base considers a rival. It would be a big recruiting win over them. Another top receiver in town was four-star wide receiver Michael Terry. Nebraska's trying to gain some ground on Texas, as Texas is trending there. Oregon's still involved. There's a couple other schools, Texas A&M still involved. We've heard some rumblings. Notre Dame might be sniffing around as well. A couple other programs potentially sniffing around. But as of right now, it feels like it's coming down to this top three. Texas at the top. Nebraska worked, to make up some ground. This is a recruitment that's now we expect to go the distance. At one point he was planning on making a decision here at the end of the summer. But then decided I want to see some games in person. Came down to Nebraska, has plans to get out to Texas, which is a short trip for him living in San Antonio. Plans to get out to Oregon at some point this year. Could make a couple more visits as well. He's even discussed potentially returning to Nebraska down the line this season. We'll see if that actually happens, or if Nebraska is even in a position to get him back on campus. And but yeah, Nebraska's kind of made up some ground there on Texas, but I still think Texas is a school to beat. Nebraska, this is one Nebraska is going to have to be patient with, continue chipping away at. I know that's not the news people might not want to hear right now, but this is one Nebraska just has to keep chipping away and hope that, as the season goes on, the strength of Nebraska's relationships and the time that Nebraska has spent recruiting him ultimately pays out. Because on the NIL standpoint, this is one that NIL is a bit involved, but there's matching offers across the board. This is something where Nebraska's getting outbid or any school's really outbidding each other. There's relatively an even floor across the board on what his value is, and Nebraska's kind of right in that mix and able to hold on against Oregon and Texas. You just have to be a little patient here and hope things swing your way, keep chipping away, keep trying to pull them away and remind him what Nebraska's building. Continue to stack wins is certainly something that's going to help. We're going to touch on four-star linebacker Christian Jones and four-star linebacker Dawson Merritt at the end of this with Greg Smith. So kind of turning the page to some of the top 2026s that were in town. One of the biggest developments of the weekend was getting four-star quarterback Michael Clayton in town. Nebraska's got a bit of a I don't know how you even put this at this point, but the 26th QB board, I guess, is something that Nebraska's trying to work through and figure out. Just because of the multiple dominoes that have already fallen, the dominoes that still need to fall, and it just it's a weird cycle for Nebraska. It's two cycles post Dylan Raiola. In 2025, they have TJ Lateef committed. He was back in town last night, but in 2026, there's a chance Nebraska goes. It takes two quarterbacks. There's Dayton Raiola, Dylan's little brother. He was back in town last night, had another good visit, but he's frequented campus a bunch. Nebraska's really just watching his junior season to see what he puts on tape in his first year at the start as a starter at Buford, and see if he's a player that fits what Nebraska's looking for at the position. Regardless, like I said, Nebraska could take two quarterbacks, and if you're looking for who that second quarterback could potentially be, it could potentially be Michael Clayton, who was offered back in June. He made a visit, kind of unprompted, kind of at the guidance of his QB trainer and some people around him, just like, hey, go check out with Nebraska. We have a lot of trust in Glenn Thomas as a QB developer. Just go see what Nebraska's about. He came back in June, landed an offer, enjoyed his time with Glenn Thomas. And that relationship with Glenn Thomas, with Adam DeMichelle, with Matt Rule, and some of the others on staff has been steadily developing since then. And he made it back on Saturday for what he called the best game environment he's been in his life so far. He had a blast just like experiencing that game, and that's across the board. Again, fans that were in attendance can say the same thing. Recruits, who've been across the country and seen games across the country have said the same thing as well. That this Nebraska win over Colorado was one of the more electric night game environments in recent college football memory. As for Clayton, this visit was big just to show him what the offense can do. He's a guy that's looking for development at the next level. Nebraska's pro-style offense that resembles a lot of what's being run in the NFL right now is something that really stands out to him. The usage of the receivers, watching Dylan Raiola play, and just watching Glenn Thomas and Matt Rule on game day. Those were things that stood out to him. After visiting on Saturday, he spent the full day practically on campus. Obviously saw the game and then went to the locker room with the team after the game to go celebrate, and returned to Nebraska in the morning, stayed the night in Lincoln, returned to the campus in the morning and spent a couple hours touring the facility, meeting with Matt Rule, meeting with Glenn Thomas, went over some film with Glenn Thomas, kind of went over his own game and mentioned, it was an opportunity for him to add some things to his game and learn something new. And it's a big visit for him. And coming out of this visit, Nebraska feels like the school to beat. I think that's the best way to put it right now. Nebraska's really well positioned here. Again, a decision isn't necessarily imminent. He's kind of mentioned a timeline of trying to shoot to commit by the end of this season. He's got a couple other visits he wants to make, explore all his options. Ole Miss is a contender. Illinois is a contender. Missouri is a contender. A couple other schools in the mix for him. But now Nebraska's well positioned coming out of this game day visit. He's got great relationships from Matt Rule down to Glenn Thomas, down to even some of the other offensive assistants and some of the recruiting assistants like Taylor Richards. And so Nebraska's in a great position there with him. And there's a good chance that he's a quarterback in the 2026 class for Nebraska. Another top 26 in town, or the headliner top 26 in town was five-star offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell. We'll talk about him with Greg Smith here at the end of the episode as well. But touching on some of the others, Dezefin Walker was back in town, four-star running back out of Raymore Peculiar in Missouri. Four-star running back Caden Jones out of Jenks, Oklahoma, was back in town. Both seemed to enjoy their time. It's certainly, Nebraska being able to run the ball the way they were, the holes they were able to create on the offensive line made an impression on both those guys. And you look at the other side of the ball, 2026 DB JJ Dunnigan out of Manhattan, Kansas. Nebraska's fighting hard against hometown Kansas State and Kansas to kind of land his commitment. He's a lengthier DB that Nebraska really likes. They offered him over the summer. He's been back to campus a couple times since, but Saturday night was his first game at Memorial Stadium. He enjoyed that visit a ton, enjoyed the atmosphere, of course, like what he saw from the DBs, something that Nebraska's kind of been able to showcase as a result of that victory and in the process of that victory is just how fun it is to play in that secondary, how fun it is to play at the second and third level of defense. And even at the first level, defensive linemen are intrigued by the development that's happening on the Terrence Knight and the fact that Nebraska, was able to pin their ears back and just get after the quarterback. At the second level, linebackers love the fact that they can kind of fly around and play truly sideline to sideline, and get into coverage and diagnose runs and do a lot of different things and really play free. And at the third level for safeties and corners, there's opportunities to cross train, there's opportunities to play multiple positions across the secondary, there's opportunities to line up all over the field, and that really stands out to guys across the country who are watching either from home or watching while in attendance. And Dunnigan was one of the top guys that was in town watching, and he really enjoyed his visit at Nebraska, and Nebraska's hoping, with some time and continues to chip away, that they can potentially pull him out of the state of Kansas and add him to that secondary room here in the future. Looking at a couple other, highlighting some 27s that were in town. 27 running back Kylan Haney was back in town. He's from Omaha Central with his teammate, Omaha Central safety Torrey Pittman. Pittman early on looks like one of the top 2027 prospects, not just in the Midwest, but in the country. A true 6'2 safety with good range. Haney, to his credit, 5'8 running back, 199 pounds, close to 200 pounds. A bruiser who's added some home run hitting speed this offseason, really got into some speed training and worked on, being able to stride out in the open field and turn some short gains into some long gains. Nebraska's high on both those guys early on, and they're high on Nebraska early on. It's going to take some time just because they're 2027s. They have some opportunities to explore some national, some national options. But Nebraska's hoping, with him that they can make an impression and they can, potentially get over the hump. By the time, those guys are juniors and seniors and are in a position where they're contending for Big Ten championships, potentially even national championships. And they'll be watching closely to see what Nebraska does in that time. Another guy I just wanted to touch on before we get to this lightning round with Greg Smith. Tajh Overton, a offensive lineman / defensive lineman out of Owasso, Oklahoma. He likely projects to the defensive side of the ball for Nebraska, and he seemed to have a good time on campus, really enjoyed the atmosphere, really enjoyed the game, and spent some time pregame with Damian Daniels, former Nebraska defensive lineman. That certainly doesn't hurt, having a former star defensive lineman that went on to play in the NFL for a bit and has bounced around between the NFL and the USFL and had some success in his post-Nebraska career. Having him in his ear certainly helped. Overall, kind of reflecting on the weekend as a whole, Nebraska did a great job getting 40 plus visitors in town, 40 plus offered visitors in town, had a bunch of commits back in town. One to note that I think is especially notable here, three-star athlete commit Jeremiah Jones in the 2025 class. Nebraska got him back in town for the first time since landing his commitment back in June. Nebraska's, battling here. Nebraska secured his commitment over Louisville, but then since then, Missouri offered, and Missouri's been pushing hard to try and flip him away. Nebraska getting him on campus and showing him what they did on both sides of the ball. You have to feel good about that if you're a Nebraska fan. You have to feel good about that as the Nebraska staff. That hopefully is able to keep him in the boat, keep him secure. I think what's working in Nebraska's favor here, as they battle against Missouri to hold on to his commitment. Missouri sees him as a tight end. Nebraska's kept it open for him as an athlete that can play tight end, wide receiver on the defensive side of the ball, play linebacker, play safety, play corner. He does a lot at his high school down in Kentucky, and Nebraska hopes to line him up at a couple different spots when he gets on campus and figure out where he's best at. Seeing him in person for the first time, this is a guy that's like a legit 6'6", maybe even, maybe a shade under 6'6". 205 pounds is what he's listed at, but he certainly looks bigger than that. Built really, really well. If you were to, he's kind of towering over some of the receivers, just like watching them, had an inch or so on Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nair. Quinn Clark's probably the only one in the receiver room kind of look at him eye to eye, which is notable because Quinn Clark's a legit 6'6". But for Jeremiah, that's a guy that Nebraska likes at a couple of different positions. One of the more versatile members of the 2025 class, and they'd like to hold on to his commitment. Last night's or Saturday night's win certainly helps in their efforts to do so. Again, wrapping this thing up, just talking on the general weekend as a whole. Nebraska was able to showcase a lot. From this was the first big game of year two of the season, of course. And this is the first big game since the new facility's been built. So there were a couple of recruits that hadn't been to town yet that got to see the facility for the first time. That's impressed, because Nebraska's facilities, we've said this all offseason, and I'm reiterating it here. Nebraska has something to stand on with these facilities. They can go to any recruit in the country and be like, look, we've got one of the top facilities in the country. That's not just me saying that. That's me having talked to some of the top recruits in the country, and they're saying that having seen some of the other top facilities in the country, and they believe Nebraska's right up there with the likes of Oregon, with the likes of Alabama, with the likes of Georgia, and the who's who of college football in terms of this little arms race, to create the best facilities. But Nebraska's right there with them. Nebraska had the opportunity to showcase a night environment at Memorial Stadium, like I mentioned at the top of this video. This was for some recruits the loudest stadium environment they'd experienced. The loudest stadium they experienced, the most energetic stadium they'd experienced. Lincoln being a college town and the campus being as close as it is to downtown, the campus being as close as it is together, certainly made an impact on these guys who had it was pretty convenient to get into town, tour the campus, get a bite to eat, then get into the game, hang out with the coaching staff, see the players, see the game, and hang out with the players after the fact. This is a very convenient experience for these guys and their parents, and that's left an impression. And then the play on the field, Nebraska needed to show on-field improvement. We've talked about that all offseason, how important and critical that is for recruiting this year is just showing that on-field improvement. Nebraska did a good job of doing that. Offensively, you're competent. You're able to move the ball. Dylan Raiola was efficient on Saturday. It wasn't his best day. Well, he didn't have to light up the scoreboard, but he was efficient. He was able to spread the ball out to a couple of different pass catchers. You were able to see the running game kind of create some lanes, turn some short gains into some long ones. You saw different styles of running backs. That left an impact on running backs across the country, just that Nebraska is able to feature different types of backs. You got a big bruiser in Dante Dowdle that kind of reminds, that's what Stephen Walker, the 2026 four-star out of Missouri, that's what he would kind of look like in the offense. And you got like a smaller, shiftier guy like Ramir Johnson, who's creating a little bit, and a guy like Brian Bonner in 2026 out of California, who's a speedster. That makes an impression on him that Nebraska has, this thunder and lightning combo, and they've got 2-3 more backs in that rotation they can go in on. Nebraska's got some versatility in the room at running back and at wide receiver. And obviously, they've got a young quarterback that's made an impression on recruits across the country. They're working on Cortez Mills. They're working on Michael Terry here in this 2025 class, but they're already making an impression on pass catchers in the 2026 class and the 2027 class. And even some guys we haven't really mentioned in 2025. Nebraska's on that hunt for 1-2 more of those big outside receivers, if they happen to miss on Terry, if they're not able to flip Mills, there's a couple other receivers that now have an eye on what's happening in Lincoln under Dylan Raiola, and it's largely because of the play of Raiola and the offense that Marcus Hattersfield coordinates. All right, we now bring in Rivals Midwest regional analyst Greg Smith for a bit of a lightning round on some of the top Midwest prospects that were in town. Greg, as first off, a big win for Nebraska on Saturday, and one that made a big impression on recruits across the country. Kind of what are you hearing just coming out of the weekend?
Yeah, it was a great night and a great weekend for Nebraska football, right? I think that people have been waiting for a long time for something like this. It feels like fans have been teased about something happening like this for a while now, where you get hype for these big games and then Nebraska just kind of falls flat on their face. So to see them go out there and dominate, at least definitely for the first half, was really nice to see. And then the recruits responded in kind. Like every video that I know you were there, I was not there, so I was like seeing it on TV. I just knew that it was not doing it justice to what it was like in person. So I just know that every recruit that I've talked to has talked about how loud that environment was, and how it was, the loudest football game they've ever been to. It was electric in there. No one's doing it like Lincoln. It was just it's been great feedback so far from all the recruits.
For sure. I think the top Midwest guy in town that we have to get to, 2025 four-star linebacker Christian Jones, is back in town for the second week in a row. Last week's visit made a positive impression. I think this week's visit is kind of the one that it feels like Nebraska's getting closer to the inevitable of being able to keep him in state.
Yeah, I definitely feel that way. And I feel like the last time we talked, I teased that future cast was coming. That future cast for Nebraska with Christian Jones is in. I feel even better about that coming out of this weekend. Christian had one of the best quotes that you're going to find from this weekend. I asked him kind of what he thought about the defense and how they played. And he said, quote, they played lights out the whole night and made that other team tap out. Like you can't really get any better than that if you're a defensive guy. And so, yeah, I feel great about where Nebraska is with Christian Jones. I think that as we've talked about a lot before, for him in Nebraska, it is really just Nebraska showing him that the things that they've talked about when it comes to development and kind of the progress of the team overall, and then the defense specifically, all of that stuff is legit. And they've done that and then some to start this season.
For sure. It certainly helps, the starting linebackers, John Bullock and Mekhi Bear, those are guys that have been in the
Yeah.
program for a couple of years, have developed into who they are this year, like guys that
Yep.
can play fast, that can play, with their ears pinned back a little bit because they're very confident in the scheme, very confident in themselves. And physically, again, Mekhi Bear is a guy that's really emerged just down the stretch or under this coaching staff. And that type of development is the stuff that Jones has been wanting to see from
Yeah.
Nebraska, and he's getting to see it. Another four-star linebacker in town was Dawson Merritt, and this was a big visit for him. As I posted yesterday, he was all smiles when he
Yeah.
got into Memorial Stadium. Was excited to be back. First time back in Lincoln since he committed to Alabama over the summer. Does Nebraska have a chance here to kind of pull for a flip? Kind of, is there a timeline on that? What are you hearing?
Yeah, the latest that I'm hearing, first of all, I think that the visit went well. Like I don't think that that's any surprise, and I do think that the thing it just lined up for Merritt in Nebraska on this one, like the exact type of performance that you need to put on for a big time linebacker in the region, is exactly what happened in that game. You mentioned already kind of Mekhi Bear, and John Bullock in their development, and you able to kind of show that you're able to show Prince Will coming off the edge, and how he could be used. Dawson Merritt could be used in that type of way as well. Like it just really lines up. Now, I think that to me, if Dawson Merritt is going to flip from what I've been told, it's only really going to be Nebraska. I think that this is only a Nebraska versus Alabama thing. I don't foresee this being something that happens like quickly, and I know that people would want that. I think this is something to keep an eye on as we get to or around signing day. I feel like it's one of those. Those happen every year, right? Where we have some guys that you're kind of watching on signing day. I think that Dawson Merritt is definitely one of those guys, but Nebraska has put its best foot forward again. They'll stay in good communication with him and kind of continue to chip away and kind of show him that he's someone that could, thrive and flourish in Lincoln.
For sure. We're kind of turning the page to 2026, a bunch of 2026 top recruits in town. Hunter Higgins, for one, now a four-star on Rivals out of May South, defensive end, really fits the profile of what Nebraska likes
Oh yeah.
at the defensive end position. He's been back on campus a bunch this year. Kind of what are you hearing on him?
Yeah, and talking to him, he said that he was the one that said that no one's doing it like Nebraska right now when it comes to that game day atmosphere. And I think Nebraska blew him away. It's a really interesting situation where he's really it feels so much like a Matt Rule recruit, right? He's in region, was kind of under recruited and under the radar. Then when you see him and I know you saw him in person over the weekend too. You see the long arms. He's got some mass to him though as well. Great frame. pass rusher off the edge. He really fits what Nebraska is looking to do on defense. And I think that they really did a good job of kind of setting the bar for him as well as they did with a couple other guys, but definitely with Hunter Higgins this weekend.
For sure. That's one Nebraska's really battling Oklahoma on, coming in the summer, kind of what we had heard was Nebraska had ground to make up on Oklahoma. I think right now, coming off of the trips he made in the summer to this visit and just the communication he's got with the staff, I think it's on par. I think Nebraska and Oklahoma
Yeah.
are right there, neck and neck. I mean, even coming out of a game like that, I think, like you said, Nebraska sets the bar where I think Nebraska might even have a slight edge, kind of heading into the rest of the season. Obviously, for 26, there's some time there. Not like
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything imminent necessarily with him. Another top rising 2026 in the region, Hudson Parliament was back in town. There he was another one who just straight up said Nebraska set the bar for him, sets the bar high for him. What else are you hearing on him coming out of this visit?
Yeah, I think that he's a kid to definitely watch as you talk about what Nebraska's doing on that offensive line and how they're trying to build that. And this again is why it's so important. And I know that I don't know if it was the last time I was on, but it may have been the time before that when you and I talked about kind of the goals for Nebraska this season. And one of them, and I feel like this is across the board, is showing development, right? And we already talked about that on the defense. But when you go and look at that offensive line and some of those holes that they were opening up, against Colorado specifically in the first half, and then what they did against UTEP last week, you can see it looks like a different unit to me than it looked like last year, right? Like they weren't leaning on people at all like that last year. And to see that happen year over year, you can go to a kid like Hudson Parliament, who really, if you get your teeth into early, can really be someone that you can try and close down, in short order because Nebraska's done such a good job. And I'm not saying that he's about to commit, but that's one that before the whole country finds out about him because it's coming, that's one that you definitely, it's good that they got him on campus and were able to set the bar for him.
For sure. Yeah, Nebraska's had him on campus a bunch, obviously offered
Mm-hmm.
back in June and have had him three times, had him on campus three times now in 4 months or so.
Yeah,
And
big time.
I think that bodes well for the Huskers' chances here. One other to get to before we get you out of here. Again, lightning round, we're really going fast here. Four-star safety, 2026, Jayden McGregory,
Mm-hmm.
out of Iowa, another top target for Nebraska. He was back in town over the weekend. I caught up with him and he kind of had good things to say about where Nebraska kind of stands right now. Another one that feels like Parliament, where the country really hasn't found out about McGregory just yet, and Nebraska positioning themselves where they are helps.
Yeah, it's to me that's been weird, right? And I can't even remember if we've talked about this. To me, I don't understand why people haven't been like more pushing harder for him. I feel like he's a guy who somehow, as a 4-star in the region, is still under the radar. But he's a very good player and really another one of those guys in kind of that back end of the defense and that secondary that can be a little bit of a Swiss Army knife, right? You like the versatility, his ability to play a couple of different positions. But Nebraska, I think, is doing a really nice job with him here. And I think that they have showing him the progress of the defense, showing him how fun it is to play in that defense, and then getting him around that atmosphere and around the other recruits this weekend, I think really resonated with him. I don't think it's a stretch at all to call Nebraska his leader at this point. And I think that he's Nebraska's to lose at this point.
For sure. Yeah, I think Michigan's a school you got to be a little wary of right now. Illinois is another one. Illinois is another one in there. With McGregory though, we saw him pregame yesterday, hanging out with a couple other recruits, but also getting some one-on-one time with John Butler. Multiple members of the secondary came up while they were doing drills to talk to him. He's kind of already starting to feel like part of the team, and
Right.
he's still 2 years away from even enrolling anywhere. So again, this is another one I think Nebraska's pretty in on early. Greg, appreciate your time on the lightning round, but anyone else you wanted to just touch on before we get you out of here?
Yeah, before I go, got to mention Jackson Cantwell, right? I think
Oh,
the
oh,
big
for sure.
five-star offensive tackle. Another great visit for him. Like anytime, and you like we have both, I know, written this at various points. Then I feel like we have to keep reminding people Nebraska is a real player in this recruitment. Like this is not like some oh, Nebraska's just kind of getting like pity visits or anything like that. They are being seriously considered and evaluated for Cantwell. He's got those family ties to Nebraska. I think that Cantwell is a kid that I could easily see going to kind of an up and coming program, and he feels that Nebraska is that type of program. He said as much again coming out of this visit. He just needs to continue building those relationships with Donovan Rayola and the rest of this staff. But Nebraska's doing what it can for the big 5-star offensive tackle.
For sure, yeah. I know one that he was surrounded by multiple recruiting assistants and
Oh yeah,
had director of player personnel Keith Williams working on him. Keith Williams has been a key relationship there. One of the reasons Nebraska's a top school in that recruitment, but one that, again, like most of these guys, nothing imminent by any means.
no,
And with Cantwell especially, this is one that's going to go the distance, I'm assuming, just based on the
long
type of
time.
contenders in this
Yeah,
recruitment, the way he's approaching his recruitment. And yeah, Nebraska's gonna have to be patient, but they're well positioned early on to stick around here
absolutely.
for sure. All right, Greg, we appreciate your time, and we'll definitely be catching up with you here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, have a good one, man. Thanks for
Yep.
having me back.